Morning light spilled through the sweeping windows of Novoline Architecture's glass lobby, cutting precise angles across marble floors polished enough to reflect the sky. A man in a worn gray suit sat quietly near the receptionist's desk, hat folded neatly on his knee. The fabric of his sleeve was frayed just at the edge, as though work and time had taken turns wearing it down. His name was Ethan Ward, a name the building itself had once carried. He watched people move in gentle choreography, heels on marble, phones pressed to ears, greetings that fluttered and faded. No one looked twice at him. A pair of interns passed by, murmuring about revisions for the Shaw Residence project, their voices full of the sharpness that comes with ambition. One of them gestured toward the etched company logo on the glass wall, Novoline, designed for tomorrow. Ethan recognized the tagline instantly. He had written it 15 years earlier on a napkin over burnt coffee. The receptionist smiled professionally. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you?" "I'm here for an appointment," Ethan said. "Mr. Cross at 10. Her fingers swept over the keyboard. "And your name?" "Ward," he replied. Her polite smile didn't waver, though confusion flickered in her eyes. "I'm sorry, I don't see a Mr. Ward on the schedule. Did you mean to meet with one of our associates?" "No," he said softly. "I meant with my partner." There was a pause long enough for discomfort to grow roots. "You'll have to wait, sir," she said, as if reciting an apology. "Someone will let Mr. Cross know." Ethan nodded and sat again, knees aching slightly as he lowered himself to the chair. A glass of water stood on the side table, untouched. The clock above reception whispered its seconds. He leaned back, listening, not to the conversations or elevator chimes, but to the faint creak in the structure, a sound he could have identified blindfolded. He had once designed this lobby to breathe light in the mornings, to turn work into possibility. Now, sitting in it, he realized light could also sharpen emptiness until it hurt. Across from him, metal letters on the wall displayed the founders' names. Only one remained, Dylan Cross, principal architect. Ethan's had been removed 2 years ago, replaced with an abstract steel panel that reflected every passerby's face except his own. He waited. Minutes collected like dust. His phone buzzed once with a message from his daughter, "Mia, good luck today, Dad. You'll crush it." He smiled briefly, then pocketed it. "Coffee, sir?" the receptionist offered without looking up. "No, thank you." Rain began against the windows, gentle, rhythmic. He watched droplets travel down the glass and thought of sketches he'd once drawn, rooftops built to direct water into curves instead of drains. Upstairs, laughter echoed from a conference room. When the elevator doors opened across the lobby, a parade of executives stepped out, sharp suits and colder glances. Ethan rose slightly, uncertain, then sat again. None recognized him. Management turnover had replaced memory with decorative confidence. His reflection stared back at him in the glass partition, a man steadier than his years, but somehow smaller against the world he built. Someone called from behind the desk. "He's still here." "Yes," the clerk said. "He's waiting for approval." Ethan folded his hands over his knee again, the clock ticking in the silence that followed. The rain darkened the city beyond the windows, and the polished nameplate gleamed above his head as if mocking the void where his own used to be. He drew a quiet breath, unhurried, unbroken. Time crawled on, and the man they forgot kept waiting in the place that once bore his name. The blueprints were still warm from the printer when they'd sketched the first logo on a napkin, Novoline. 2 names, 1 dream. Ethan Ward and Dylan Cross hadn't been just partners. They'd been brothers in all but blood, building an empire out of a converted warehouse and a shared belief that architecture could breathe. In those early days, the office smelled of sawdust and strong coffee, and the sound of Ethan's daughter, Mia, toddling under drafting tables was the rhythm of their success. She was 3 when they made the Inc. 500 list, her crayon drawings taped to the glass walls like abstract art. Then came the gray season. The market turned, slow and suffocating, like a fog rolling off the ocean. Clients vanished. Invoices piled up. Dylan paced the hallways, tie loosened, eyes wide with a fear Ethan had never seen. That's when the vultures in Seville rose suits arrived, private equity investors with smiles like scalpels. They offered a lifeline, capital for a majority stake. Temporary, they promised. Just until the storm passes. We'll hold the seat warm for you, Ethan. He hesitated. But the alternative was bankruptcy. The alternative was letting 50 employees go. So he signed. 2 weeks later, the real storm hit. Not financial, but personal. His wife, Sarah, collapsed. The diagnosis was a sentence whispered in hospital corridors, a word Ethan couldn't bring himself to say aloud. The board meetings suddenly felt obscene. How could he argue about profit margins when the woman who had held his hand while he drew his first blueprint was fading? You go, Dylan had said, placing a hand on his shoulder. Family first. We've got this. The company's safe. Ethan believed him. He stepped away. He traded the corner office for a hospital room, the roar of the stock market for the steady beep of a heart monitor. For 6 months, he was a father first, a husband second, and a businessman not at all. He retained his shares, 30%, a silent anchor, but he stopped reading the quarterly reports. He trusted Dylan to keep the ship steady. But ambition is a slow fire. It doesn't burn the house down all at once. It warps the beams until the structure forgets its original shape. While Ethan was wiping fevered brows and reading bedtime stories, the board was rebranding. While he was learning to cook for one, they were voting to streamline leadership. Redundancy, the memo said. Consolidation of vision. Dylan's face replaced theirs on the website. Then on the letterhead. Then, one Tuesday, a maintenance crew painted over Ethan's name on the lobby wall, covering the ghost of Ward and Cross with a sleek, solitary cross. When Ethan finally returned, gaunt and hollowed out, to sign a document, the receptionist had asked, "Can I help you, sir?" He'd laughed, thinking it was a joke. "It's Ethan. I'm here to see Dylan." She checked the system. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ward isn't listed as an active employee. Do you have an appointment?" That was the moment the ghost was born. Not dead, but erased. The emails stopped. The board invitations dried up. He was a shareholder on paper, a stranger in practice. Dylan never called to explain. He just let the silence do the work, letting Ethan fade into the background of a life he'd helped build. Mia, now 12, had asked him once, holding a school project about her dad. "Why isn't your name on the building, Dad?" He'd smoothed her hair, the lie tasting like ash. "Because the building isn't important anymore, sweetie. You are." He'd walked out of Novaline that day thinking he'd left it behind. He didn't realize that leaving and being forgotten were two different things. And he certainly didn't realize that one day, he'd have to walk back in, not as a ghost, but as the owner of the haunting. The memory faded as the sharp ring of the lobby phone snapped Ethan back to the present. The rain outside had stopped, leaving gray, indifferent light to wash over the polished floors. Novaline was no longer a dream built on drafting tables, it was a machine. Through the glass walls of the executive floor above, he could see executives pacing, phones pressed to their ears, chasing the next lucrative contract under the guidance of his former partner, Dylan Cross. Dylan had always been good at selling the vision. The new board was just good at selling the price tag. Ethan had not come back today to reclaim a desk or demand an apology. He had come to discuss something that actually mattered, the establishment of the Claire Ward Scholarship Foundation. It was a project he had funded using a portion of his untouched dividends, designed to provide full-ride architectural grants for underprivileged students. He had emailed his intentions weeks ago, scheduling this 10 o'clock meeting to finalize the integration of the foundation into Novaline's expanding corporate social responsibility arm. Yet, to the front desk, he was just an unverified contractor taking up expensive, prime square footage. Hours bled into one another. At 11 o'clock, the receptionist handed him a plastic visitor badge without even looking up. At noon, a flurry of junior associates walked past him, loudly debating restaurant reservations for a client dinner, their briefcases brushing against his scuffed leather shoes. No one apologized. By 2 o'clock, the building's ambient temperature seemed to drop, a calculated chill meant to keep employees alert, making Ethan's worn suit feel thinner. He sat perfectly still. He didn't pace. He didn't sigh heavily or check his watch with exaggerated frustration. He simply waited, his hands folded calmly over his knee, projecting a profound stillness that slowly began to make the busy room around him feel strangely uneasy. A security guard near the elevators shifted his weight, his eyes lingering on Ethan for a little too long. It was the look reserved for people who didn't fit the aesthetic of success, men whose shoes were scuffed, and whose presence lacked the frantic, breathless urgency of modern corporate life. A young assistant in a sharp navy blazer paused near the desk, glancing at Ethan with a mixture of pity. "He's been here since morning," she whispered to the clerk. "Do we know who he is waiting for?" "Cross," the clerk replied, typing rapidly. "But Mr. Cross is in back-to-back acquisition meetings. Tell him to just leave a business card." The clerk didn't come over. They assumed his patience was just a lack of options. They mistook his stillness for surrender. At 3:30, Ethan's phone vibrated against his leg. The screen lit up with a picture of a smiling girl with braces and messy hair. It was a text from Mia. "Did they meet you yet, Dad? Good luck." Ethan smiled, the warmth of it reaching deep into his tired eyes. He typed back with deliberate slowness, wanting her to feel his calm. "Soon, kiddo. They're just very busy making sure everything is perfect. I'll call you when I leave." He locked the screen and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He didn't feel anger. He felt a profound, quiet pity for a building that had forgotten how to simply breathe. The digital clock on the wall ticked past 4, then 4:30. The lobby began to empty as early leavers filtered toward the revolving doors, their voices echoing in the cavernous space. Outside, the sky bruised into a deep, bruising twilight purple. When the clock finally struck 5, ambient lighting shifted to its evening setting, casting long, dramatic shadows across the cold marble. The receptionist packed her bag, slipping on her coat, before finally looking over at the solitary figure in the chair. He was still there. Dignity intact. Unbroken by the hours of deliberate erasure. He wasn't a man who had been defeated by the agonizing wait. He was a man who simply knew that some things were worth sitting for, even when the world tried to make a man like him invisible. Upstairs, the executive conference room glowed in the polished sterility of ambition. Dylan Cross scrolled through presentation slides, glancing at graphs while half listening to a young consultant pitch the company's latest overhaul. "Our core rebranding," the consultant announced, "positions Novaline as the future of architectural innovation, progress without restraint." The phrase landed neatly, engineered for applause, and Dylan rewarded it with a thin smile. Around the table, department heads murmured affirmations. Nobody dared interrupt the man who had become the company's public signature for success. Downstairs, the lobby had emptied to silence and soft echoes. The faint hiss of rain tapping against the window panes muted the city noise outside. The janitor, a sturdy man in his 50s named Marcus, pushed his mop cart toward the reception desk. Seeing the visitor still there, he paused, squinting slightly. "Excuse me," he said gently. "You waiting for someone, sir?" Ethan looked up, eyes tired yet unaffected. "I was supposed to meet an old colleague." Marcus blinked, recognition dawning in fragments. "Mr. Ward?" he whispered, setting the mop aside. "I'll be damned, it's you. You used to come down to the site floors, checking wiring layouts yourself. Trained the interns to check stress points long before engineering caught up. You told me once real architecture isn't about how high it stands, but how long it stays standing." His grin crinkled the corners of his eyes. "You designed the Novaline framework, didn't you?" Ethan's smile was small, almost protective. "We designed it," he corrected softly. Marcus shook his head. "They don't even know the name comes from your design philosophy. Nova, as in renewal, and line for structural integrity. You said every building deserves a second chance after failure." A hint of sorrow crossed Ethan's expression, but his tone stayed mild. "It's all right, Marcus. The building remembers." The janitor laughed quietly. "Maybe the bricks do, sir. But people sure don't. Moments later, the intercom chimed overhead, followed by the nervous voice of an IT technician. Attention management, systems integrity check delayed. We're experiencing a back-end server crash on the billing grid. Please stand by before closing operations. The announcement broke the quiet hum of evening routine. The receptionist frowned, tapping at frozen screens. The lights blinked once and steadied again. On the upper floor, Dylan's meeting dissolved into mild annoyance. "Reboot the server," he said curtly, standing to pour another coffee. "We're integrating new accounting branches. Minor hiccups are expected." But the minor hiccup refused to clear. The billing database couldn't synchronize with corporate permissions. Access credentials returned a single line of red text: verification required. Founding owner key missing. The IT director leaned across his tablet, heartbeat quickening. "This is odd. The founder authentication chain hasn't been triggered since Novaline's first registration filings. It's asking for primary architect credentials." Ethan, seated below and unaware of the growing commotion, pressed his palms together, deep in thought. The truth was simple yet invisible. Years ago, before selling control, he had stored ownership records, trust documents, digital patents, equity rights, under a private encrypted account linked solely to his founder key. It had never been revoked. The system might forget his name on the sign, but code remembered what convenience tried to erase. Marcus noticed the faint tremor in the lights and murmured, "What's that blinking mean?" Ethan smiled faintly, looking up toward the distant hum of the top floor. "It means the building's asking who owns the room." And above them, alarms of technology rather than fire began to whisper, awakening the memory of the man everyone believed they could easily forget. The glitch began as a murmur in the servers, a single corrupted query rippling through the billing grid like a stone dropped in still water. Upstairs, IT screens filled with red warnings: access denied. Founder authorization required. The lead technician blinked at his monitor, sweat beading despite the climate control. "This can't be right," he muttered. "The founder chain hasn't activated since the original setup." His fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling archived protocols. The system responded coldly: primary key E. Ward. Verification pending. He forwarded the alert to Dylan's executive line, heart pounding. "We need founder-level clearance to unlock the equity vault. It's pulling from the original incorporation files." Dylan, mid-conversation in the boardroom, glanced at his phone. The message cut through his composure like frost. "What the hell is this?" He slammed his coffee down, the liquid sloshing over the rim. "Get it fixed. Now." Down in the lobby, the receptionist's terminal stuttered. Her screen flickered once, twice, then froze on a stark prompt: Founder E. Ward, access required. Confirm identity. She stared, mouth parting slightly. "Security," she whispered into her headset. "Something's wrong with the system. It's asking for a founder named Ward?" The guard nearest Ethan straightened, his radio crackling with overlapping voices. "All units, possible glitch and central auth. Lock down visitor access until cleared." His eyes landed on the lone figure in the visitor chair, the man who had sat unmoving since morning. "Sir," he said cautiously, "you said your name was Ward?" Ethan looked up, expression unchanged. "Yes." The guard's face paled. He keyed his radio again. "We've got a Ward in the lobby. The one who's been waiting." Confusion spread like ink through water. Assistants gathered at the reception desk, murmuring. Phones buzzed with internal alerts. The polished efficiency of Novaline fractured into whispers. "Is he the Ward? Like the Ward?" Dylan burst from the elevator, Ty Askew, fury sharpening his features. "What is this nonsense? We're losing the entire billing close because of some ghost in the machine?" His voice echoed off the marble, drawing stares from lingering staff. He strode toward the desk, demanding, "Show me the log." The receptionist pointed mutely at her screen. Dylan leaned in, scoffing. "E. Ward? That's ancient history. Over." His words died as his gaze shifted left. There, in the same chair, sat Ethan, hands folded, suit rumpled from hours of deliberate disregard, eyes meeting Dylan's without surprise or malice. "You!" Dylan sputtered, the single word hanging ragged in the sudden hush. Ethan rose slowly, unfolding his frame with the unhurried grace of someone who had waited long enough to choose his moment. "Still me." The lobby went silent. The guard's radio fell quiet. Assistants froze mid-text. Even the distant hum of elevators seemed to pause. Recognition burned through the arrogance like acid on paper, Dylan's face cycling through denial, shock, then the slow drain of color. The man they had dismissed as a forgotten contractor, a relic unworthy of a 5-minute slot, was Ethan Ward, co-founder, silent majority owner, the architect whose designs had birthed Novaline from nothing. Dylan's mouth worked soundlessly. "Ethan, this is..." "You were busy," Ethan said simply, no edge to his voice. "I waited." The weight of those words settled over the room, heavier than any outburst. Staff exchanged glances, the junior assistant who had joked earlier now pale against the wall. Marcus, the janitor, watched from the shadows, a faint nod of vindication crossing his face. Dylan straightened, attempting recovery. "We need to talk. Upstairs. Now." Ethan adjusted his jacket, the gesture calm, deliberate. "Lead the way." As they turned toward the elevators, the receptionist's screen resolved with a soft chime, "Access granted. Founder verified." The lobby exhaled collectively, the silence no longer empty but charged with the gravity of truths machines remembered when men chose to forget. Ethan stepped into the ascending light, the building that had ignored him now compelled to listen. The elevator hummed upward, carrying 2 men and a silence thick enough to feel solid. Dylan's reflection jittered on the mirrored wall, perfect tie, perfect posture, but eyes darting with calculation. Ethan's posture was still, his face unreadable. Years ago, they had ridden this same elevator side by side, laughing about design imperfections. Now, the space felt narrower, as if the past itself were pressing between them. When the doors parted on the top floor, Dylan stepped out first, summoning conviction from habit. "We'll clear this up," he said too quickly. "Someone resurrected an old file, and IT exaggerated the functions." Ethan didn't reply. He followed, step steady, pausing at the boardroom threshold. Through the glass walls he could see the entire skyline his mind had once imagined into being, steel lines meeting clouds, reflections of ambition polished to an unforgiving shine. Faces turned toward the doorway as he entered, curiosity arresting conversations mid-sentence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dylan began, tone attempting control. "This is Mr. Ethan Ward, Novaline's, former co-founder. It seems an automated permissions issue brought his ID back into the system. We're addressing it now." Ethan walked to the table's head. "Don't bother," he said. His voice was low, carrying weight each of them felt in their spines. "The system just did what people wouldn't, it remembered correctly." Murmurs flickered between corners of the room. The legal director cleared her throat, uneasy. "Mr. Ward, with respect, the company transitioned ownership nearly a decade ago." "Not ownership," Ethan interrupted softly. "Just operational control." He placed a thin folder on the table. The papers inside, yellowed where staples had bitten, bore signatures the board didn't want to see, his and Dylan's, notarized, witnessed, irreversible. "Clause 8, Ethan explained. "In the event of founder withdrawal for family emergency, majority equity remains vested. No expiration." My lawyer kept the originals. He slid a second document across the table, a current registry of shareholders showing, in black and white, his 62% ownership still intact. "You didn't erase me. You just stopped looking." Silence vacuumed the oxygen. Dylan's jaw tensed, eyes flicking toward legal like a man checking for exits. This isn't about control." "It never was," Ethan said. "You already had control. You turned it into corruption." The word landed like a slow explosion. He opened another folder, emails, contracts, consultancy kickbacks issued under opaque subsidiaries. "You built an empire on efficiency," Ethan continued. But you cut the heart out of your own employees doing it. Layoffs before holidays. Projects outsourced to ghost partnerships. Predatory developer clauses that trap small firms into bankruptcy before deadlines. A few board members shifted guiltily, others stared down at their hands. Ethan straightened. I didn't come here to humiliate anyone. I came to remind you who we said we'd be. He touched the conference table, running his fingers along its glossy edge. You remember those nights, Dylan? 2 thermoses of coffee, blueprints spread across the floor, Claire making sandwiches because neither of us could afford to eat out. We built Novaline because we believed architecture could restore dignity to spaces where people lived and worked. And look at it now. He gestured to the sterile room dense with luxury, with fear. You've turned dignity into dividends. Dylan swallowed hard. Ethan, you can't just walk in after all these years and what? Ethan asked. Care? No one moved. He turned to the HR director. Gather the department leads, please. Now. Within minutes, senior managers crowded along the walls, curiosity drawn by rumor. Glass reflected their puzzled faces as they hovered, whispering. Ethan addressed them directly. Effective immediately, Novaline will restructure, he said. Excess executive salaries will be extracted to rebuild staff support. The exploitative consultant contracts signed under Cross Holdings are void. And the leadership responsible for their creation will step D. Gasps fluttered through the room. Dylan surged forward, color flooding back into his face. You can't fire me in my own company. Ethan looked at him, almost kindly. You're mistaken. It's our company. And I'm firing what it became. The HR director's trembling voice broke the pause. Under the legacy charter, his decision stands. Founder equity grants him authority. Dylan's protest dissolved into hollow sound. For the first time, his confidence withered visibly. Through the glass walls, staff across the floor watched. Project managers, interns, assistants, witnessing the quiet undoing of arrogance. They couldn't hear every word, but they saw Dylan's gestures turn desperate, then stop completely as security approached discreetly at Ethan's nod. The man who had once ruled through volume now exited in silence, shoulders drawn inward, escorted gently but firmly past the people he hadn't bothered to remember. Ethan remained by the window, staring out across the city. The skyline glistened in the evening haze, his skyline, though no signature ever truly claimed it. He sighed, then looked back to the assembled room. There's work to do, he said simply. Real work. For too long we built glass towers and forgot to build trust. None argued. Later, as the news spread across floors and departments, myths began to circulate. That the founder's ghost had returned, that justice had finally drawn breath. But Ethan ignored the whispers. Titles, honors, applause, nothing replaced what time had taken. Yet for the first time in years, when he looked at the reflection of Novaline's polished lobby below, he didn't see emptiness. He saw movement. People standing straighter, listening. Across the corridor, Marcus watched through the cleaning bay window, mop in hand, and gave a single approving nod. High above the murmurs, the sound of new beginnings filled the room, not the cheer of conquest, but the soft, collective exhale of integrity finding its way back home. 3 mornings later, the lobby no longer felt like an icebox. Sunlight streamed through the windows, refracting off lighter paint newly chosen for its warmth, not its prestige. Ethan Ward walked across the same marble he had once waited upon for half a day, this time without a visitor badge or agenda tucked under his arm. There was no grand announcement, no ceremony surrounded by shareholders. The transformation was deliberately quiet, like the man who started it. The receptionist rose as he entered, instinctively smoothing her jacket. Good morning, Mr. Ward. Her tone carried respect that hadn't existed a week earlier, not fear, not formality, but understanding. Around the lobby, employees paused their conversations and stood in unconscious courtesy as he passed through, the very same halls that had taught them indifference. Ethan nodded to each of them, pausing once to thank a junior project coordinator for staying late to help with safety audits. The woman looked startled, then smiled awkwardly, unaccustomed to being seen. In one corner, Marcus was polishing the brass door handles to a deep gold. He straightened when Ethan approached, mop still in hand. "You fixed the building, sir?" Ethan shook his head. "No, Marcus. The people did." His office upstairs had been stripped of extravagance. The old boardroom table replaced by a simple oval one made from reclaimed oak. Child-drawn pictures adorned the notice wall, blueprints in crayon from the new staff daycare program. Policy folders sat open beside an entirely different document, the official charter for the Claire and Mia Ward Scholarship Fund, now active under Novaline's Outreach Division. Each scholarship represented an architect's son or daughter who might one day build something stronger than profit margins. The first real meeting under his direction felt less like a correction and more like a confession. Former mid-level employees shared ideas for safer construction practices, fair pay adjustments, and flexible schedules for parents. Ethan listened, pen tapping lightly, the same patient rhythm that had unnerved the previous regime. He ended the meeting with words simple enough to be overlooked. "Let's design places that look like second chances." That evening, as the building emptied, Mia appeared at his doorway. 12 years old now, tall for her age, she wore her school uniform with shoes untied. He pretended to be shocked. "Security breach!" She laughed, slipping into the seat across from him. "Mr. Cross would have had a meltdown over untied shoelaces." "Mr. Cross had meltdowns over a lot of things," he said with gentle humor. "How was practice?" "Good. Coach says I run like you drive, steady and late." She grinned, eyes alight. On the desk she placed a small model of a bridge she'd built in class. "They said to make something that lasts." He turned it in his hands, feeling the rough glue spots along the joints. "It will." "Did you really fire everyone?" she asked, teasing now, half hopeful. "Only the ones who forgot how to listen." For a moment, quiet settled between them, comfortable and full. Beyond the glass wall, the city glowed in rows of amber light, each windowed tower reflecting another. People all over were still working, still dreaming, unaware that an old building with a new heart had found its pulse again. Ethan watched the reflection of his daughter in the dark glass, her silhouette overlapping the skyline he'd once chased. It looked different tonight, less like conquest, more like home. "Ready to go, kiddo?" She nodded, gathering her books. As the elevator doors closed behind them, their faint mirrored shapes merged together, father and daughter framed by the same golden lobby that had finally remembered what it meant to welcome someone in. The dedication ceremony ended the way Ethan preferred things to end, without applause, without cameras chasing his every step. A soft string quartet played near the lobby staircase as a small crowd of employees, partners, and city officials lingered over coffee. It was more than an unveiling. It was an apology dressed as architecture. For the first time in a decade, the polished bronze plaque on Novaline's main wall shimmered with two names again. Founders, Ethan Ward and Dylan Cross, integrity built here. The crowd murmured quietly, the words integrity built here catching the light like a promise renewed. Dylan had chosen not to attend. He'd sent a short handwritten note, respectful, remorseful, the kind of letter that closed circles gently rather than sharply. Ethan had read it once and folded it into a drawer. Tonight wasn't about either of them individually but about the structure itself rediscovering its foundation. Guests drifted toward the exits until only the faint echo of heels and polite laughter remained. Ethan stepped closer to the plaque. His faint reflection floated over the engraved lettering, a ghost blended with his own creation. The metal was cold beneath his fingers, but he felt warmth in the gesture, a quiet reconciliation between man and memory. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced down to see Mia's message glowing bright against the hum of the empty lobby. "Proud of you, Dad. Mom would be too." He smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't need witnesses. Slipping the phone back into his coat, he looked once more at his name gleaming beside Dylan's. The perfection of the surface didn't matter, the reflection did. It showed him older, lines cut deep but kind, the face of a builder who had learned that creation doesn't end with buildings, it ends with legacy. Outside, night folded around the city softly. Rain began again, gentle, forgiving, tracing new lines down the glass walls. Ethan turned toward the doorway, leaving the plaque to its silence. He'd waited all afternoon to be seen. The company had waited years to remember who built it,